Like all North Africa, it is a land of desert, but we were blessed by the river Nile, the longest river in the world, that runs from south to north, rendering the valley and the delta one of the most fertile lands in the whole world. It's only 4% of the total surface of Egypt. Scholars estimate that at the beginning of our history, around 3,000 years BC, the population of Egypt was about 2 million. Nowadays, it's over 100 million, and we still live on the 4% of the total area of Egypt. That's the Nile and the valley, of course, with the exception of a few nomads here and there. The ancient Egyptian history starts around 3000 BC and ends with the conquest of Alexander the Great in the year 332 BC, starting a new era of our history, the Greco-Roman era. After a Greek era, Egypt was conquered by the Romans in the year 30 and then became part of the Byzantine Empire, 4th century. The Arabs invaded 641. It became a Muslim country, and it was ruled by many different Arab dynasties until the Ottomans conquered in 1516. Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt in the year 1798, taking us to the, like you can say, the modern era of Egypt, because part of the troops that came to make sure that Napoleon will leave the country when he lost the war after 3 years of occupation of Egypt, part of that was Muhammad Ali, who we call the founder of modern Egypt. And then finally, it is the newer era, the revolution of 1952. Luckily, when you come to visit, we get the chance to show you all the monuments related to different eras. We have plenty of them, and it makes the history more enjoyable to see, to learn about it, seeing the monuments at the same time. We start, if you please, Ophir, by the first photo of Memphis. Memphis was the capital that was chosen in a median position in the apex of the delta by the pharaoh Nar-Mernina, the founder of the first dynasty around 3000 BC, in order to found his capital. The ancient Egyptians built their capitals, their palaces, houses out of mud brick. So nothing remains, just mounds of clay here and there. But what remains is the ruins of the temple that was dedicated to the god Teh of Memphis. Egypt, under the ancient Egyptians, was divided into 42 provinces. Every province has its own deity. When the capital is in Memphis, then the god of Memphis, Teh, will become the god of everybody. Here comes Ramses the Great, one of the pharaohs of the 19th dynasty. We call him Ramses, he is Ramses II, but we call him Ramses the Great because he was a great pharaoh. Most of all, he left more monuments than any other pharaoh did. Then we go to Saqqara, the necropolis that was founded in order to serve as a burial place for the elite of the society that lived in Memphis. We see for the first time, the first construction in the history of mankind made out of stone. And that's the complex of Zoser. It's a must-see, it's among our must-sees. We made that, we visited that Ophir, of course, together. And what we see in front of us is the wall that encircles the precincts of the pyramid of Zoser. And that is the step pyramid. If we can go to the next picture, please.
Wafika, hang on just a second. There seems to be a little problem here.
No problem whatsoever.
Okay.
That's the colonnade, the first columns ever constructed on Earth. It takes us in a dramatic entry, you can say, to the precincts or the inside of the complex of Zoser. Next one, if you please, Ophir. Ah, there it is. That step pyramid is the first pyramid ever. We were still experimenting to get to the true perfect pyramid that we're going to see in Giza. The most important and the most perfect is that of Cheops, as I'm going to explain to you. The architect who produced this pyramid for his master, King Zoser, his name is Imhotep. He's a genius architect. He put one step after the other, each one smaller than the one that preceded. It leaves us the form of a step. And this is actually the entry. I don't think we did that, Ophir, because for the first time ever, the pyramid of Zoser is finally open for visitors, for tourists. I'm not sure we did that together. It wasn't maybe open yet, but this is the entry to the burial chamber of the King Zoser. If we can proceed to the other one. The next one, please, Ophir. And that's the burial chamber. You'll be standing up and you can see way down the shaft, the burial chamber of King Zoser, where his sarcophagus would lay forever. Next, please, Ophir. One of the very interesting things that you see in Saqqara are those tombs of dignitaries, members of the royal families, and high officials. There are many of them who wanted to be buried in the shadow of their master, their pharaoh. And one of them is the mastaba of Kagimni, or the tomb of Kagimni. The ancient Egyptians, when they built those tombs, they surrounded the walls, or they covered the walls with scenes of everything they knew in this life, as though they wanted to create a repertoire. This is how they imagined the second life will be. This scene, for example, that we see in front of us is a hippopotamus, a female hippopotamus giving birth to a baby. The very tiny, such a very tiny details, making the scenes charming. Next, if you please, Ophir. This is the mastaba of Miri Ruka. Miri Ruka was the son-in-law of the pharaoh. Inside every mastaba, you have to have a statue of you. A statue of you will act as a reserve to your body. If something should happen to the mummy, then you can live by means of that statue. Your spirit is going to be incarnated in that statue. And because this is you, this is actually you, according to them, right in front of the statue, there is a there is an offering table upon which the priest you choose will put offerings to always for you to feed upon.
Wafika, hang on just a second. I think you have, if I'm not mistaken, I think you may have an automatic transition in here, which is causing the slides to jump automatically, even when I'm not ready. So hang on just a second. On mouse click. There we go. And we should be okay now. Hang on, and back to the slides. So we were here before. Okay, so do you want to move to the next one?
Yes, please.
Okay, wonderful. So here we are. Let's see if I can control it now.
Yeah, oh, inshallah. So some of the many scenes that you see inside those tombs are the scenes of the offering bearers. Upon the funeral, all the servants will be bringing everything you will need to use in the second life. You can see here many vegetables, legumes. There will be birds, there will be meat, there will be dresses, tools, jewelry. Everything will be put together with you inside your tomb. Much later in our history, about 1,200 years, there's a piece of poetry that was signed by the lute player. Maybe he was a singer as well. He said, "Wear linen and perfume. No one ever came back to tell us what lays ahead." In other words, enjoy this lifetime. Maybe that's all you've got. Next, please, Ophir. The pyramid of Onas, one of the pyramids of the 5th dynasty. It's a little bit built a little bit after that of Cheops, that of Giza pyramids, but they are much smaller inside and much simpler in construction. But the special thing about them that inside you get to see the inscriptions that known by the scholars as the pyramid text. This is the name given to them by the scholars of Egyptology. These are all the texts, all the prayers, all the stages that you will go from one step to another in order to reach a life of eternity. And you can see the name of the pharaoh inside the cartouche popping up here and there. And the cartouche is originally this Shen sign, or the circle that will give eternity to the name of the pharaoh, just elongated a little bit in order to house the name of the pharaoh. And you can see, maybe you can discern the sarcophagus. And then we go to Giza. The culminating point in building the pyramid. Those pyramids were really perfect ones, facing the 4 cardinal points. And those pyramids are supposed to imitate the sun rays. 4th dynasty, around 2600 BC, the sun god Ra becomes most powerful. Egyptians believe that you have to follow the sun god Ra through the 12 hours of the night in order to reach eternity. So they transformed the shape of the pyramid in order to look like the sun rays, so they will be in the good graces of the sun god and they will be reaching eternity. A lot of science is behind it. You have to be in good mastery of geometry, architecture, astronomy, because of the perfect alignment with the 4 cardinal points of those buildings. And for the Egyptians, let me tell you that science, they were only interested in abstract science. The Greeks came to our temples, they learned and they founded the theory. But for us, it was a very practical science, applied science all the way through. Next, please, Ophir. This is the entry or the inside of the pyramid of King Cheops. This is what we call Grand Gallery. It's a little bit difficult first at the entry, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a masterpiece of architecture 8 meters high that will finally lead you to the burial chamber of the pharaoh. The burial chamber of the pharaoh was first entered in the 9th century. The Khalifa al-Ma'mun, the Abbasid Khalifa from Baghdad, sent his men in order to capture the treasures inside. They dug for 3 years, and to their dismay, they found absolutely nothing, an empty sarcophagus. The ancient Egyptians distinguished between 2 different kinds of eternity. There was the earthly eternity, that is to say that you're going to make buildings that will last you forever and commemorate your name forever. And that was perfectly met in the Pyramid of Cheops. And there was another kind of eternity, which was most important, of course, which was to be able to live in an eternal life. I'm sure that Cheops perceived that he will enjoy that second eternity, but until now, we never found his body. Some say that the burial chamber you get to visit was just a camouflage, and the true burial chamber with his mummy was never really recovered until now. Next, please, Ophir. The boat of Cheops. As we said, everything you need in this lifetime, you had to have with you in the second lifetime, that is to say in your tomb. But that boat is 43 meters long. It was too big to be buried inside the pyramid with the pharaoh, so it was buried in a pit next to it. Specialists in building the boat is as impressive to them as the pyramids are to architects, and you get to visit that when you visit Giza as well. Next, please. This is totally illegal, but we're very grateful for those young adventurers because of casualties. The authorities forbid now to try to climb those pyramids, but just this photo shows you those people who sneaked up the pyramid of Cheops. It shows you how high the pyramid is. They're sitting there contemplating, maybe meditating after they finally reach their goal. Next, please, Ophir. The Sphinx. We believe that the word Sphinx is Greek for Shisipanch, the living image. Every Sphinx is a living image of a pharaoh. Only pharaohs will be represented as sphinxes, showing their master as the strongest and fiercest animal that they feared. And that's the largest one we have, guardian of the necropolis, right in front of one of the pyramids. You get to see when you get there. It's very imposing, let me tell you. Next, please, Ophir. Then we take a flight, an hour's flight, in order to get to Luxor. Luxor was the capital of Egypt during the most glamorous era of our history, when the most ancient empire was founded, 1550 BC. Over there is the city that houses more monuments than any other in the whole world. Let me tell you that every temple was, you can say, a propaganda machine for the pharaoh in our history. So the god Amun was always a minor god, and Luxor was a minor province. But when, in a certain turn of events, the princes of Luxor became pharaohs, they needed some kind of propaganda in order to permit them to consider their god, the god Amun, a state god. So the priests were right there to help. They made some kind of legend in which there was a unity between the god Amun and the god Ra. He becomes the god Amun-Ra, and voila, there you go, you're good to go with Luxor as the capital of Egypt. The entry is flanked on both sides by ram-headed sphinxes, because the ram is the representation, or one of the representations, of the god Amun. very imposing entry. And then in front of us, this is the pylon or the facade of the temple. It was never finished. It was built by our last pharaoh, Nakhtenebbu, never finished because we were invaded by the Persians. Next, please, Ophir. Outside the scenes, outside of the temples, the scenes will be the pharaoh shown as the ferocious ruler who is conquering his enemies, representing them as offerings to the deity of the temple, the god Amun-Ra. And you can see them. This is supposed to be their locks of hair, symbolic of their locks of hair. And he's dragging them to show that he conquered his enemies in front of the god Amun-Ra. Next, please, Ophir. This is another masterpiece of architecture, the Great Hypostyle Hall, the first basilica in the whole world. And again, for a dramatic procession, you got those columns to both sides. During certain festivities, the god Amun-Ra is going to leave his seat in the sanctuary and go and take part or head actually some festivities here and there. I'm going to explain to you one of them, and you can see in the back the obelisks, and again one of the big successes of engineering in ancient Egypt. The only thing that holds it up high actually is its perfection. Next, please, Ophir. Inside the walls of the temple, it will be always offering scenes, offerings made by the pharaoh to the divinities. And you can see the god Amun-Ra with his emblem, the two feathers that surmount his head. And then he's offering the pharaoh himself what we call Hebusudu. What's the Hebusudu? The Hebsed, which is the singular of Hebusudu, is the Jubilee festival that the pharaoh celebrates originally after the passage of 30 years of reign to prove that he's still fit in order to rule his subjects. If you really discern that scene in front of us, it is some kind of a square to a rectangle. It's divided into 4 pieces, and those 4 pieces are actually 2 seats, mirror image of each other, showing the pharaoh as ruler of the ruler of the north and ruler of the south. And the whole scene is surrounded by different divinities that reside in the temple of the god Amun-Ra as well. Next, please, Ophir. Every temple had a sacred lake. Luckily, we still have the sacred lake functioning in the temple of Karnak. And that sacred lake was first for the purification of the priests, and second, it was for very mysterious pieces of drama. It was the stage for those drama pieces in which, like the legends of foundation of the cosmos, will be played over there to make sure that when they celebrate those legends, the eternal existence will continue being there in their country. Next, please, Ophir. The Temple of Luxor. Very close to the Temple of Karnak, actually, there is an avenue of Sphinx that links the Temple of Karnak to the Temple of Luxor. We usually, logistically speaking or practically speaking, we usually visit it at night because it's open until 9 o'clock. This is something that I about that temple, visiting it by night. Why is that? Because once a year during the Opet festival, the sanctuary in the Karnak temple and go to the Luxor temple. Through the 12 hours of the night, he will be rejuvenated again. How will that be done? In the temple of Luxor resides the dead image of the god Amun-Ra. Amun-Ra Kamut F, that's his name. And before you rejuvenate yourself, according to the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians, you die. So the god Amun-Ra will come to a complete death and will be resurrected again in one of the very mysterious halls that you get to visit when you do that trip to the Luxor temple that has got 12 columns representing the 12 hours of the night. So one night spent by the god Amun-Ra in Luxor temple, and he's ready to go for another year. Cycles were very important for ancient Egyptians. You had to go in cycles, highs and low, and then repeat them again. And these rituals that were undertaken in those temples were to assure that those cycles will continue forever. Next, please. We get to go to the West Bank, where everything regarding the dead, concerning the dead exists. The ancient Egyptians believed that when the sun sinks in the west, it dies. Everybody who dies will follow the sun god Ra through the 12 hours of the night. In front of us here, you see a balloon. You can do that activity. It's a very interesting one, seeing all the monuments of Luxor from up high. In front of us, we see the partly rock cut, partly freestanding temple of the queen goddess, the queen Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was a queen, and let me tell you that in our ancient Egyptian language, we don't have a word equivalent to queen. There are no queens in ancient Egypt. There is a royal wife and there is a royal daughter, but no queens. But Hatshepsut was too ambitious to settle for that, and she sort of usurped the throne from Thutmose III. She was a co-regent of Thutmose III, and she ruled for 22 years, and in order to be able to do that, she always represented herself as a man. Those temples that we call mortuary temple were supposed to render divine the pharaoh after his death, and the scenes will be always about some kind of autobiography showing the most important deeds accomplished by the pharaoh during his reign. Next, please, Ophir. So you see the queen goddess Hatshepsut. If you really concentrate on the facial features, you're going to see, you will identify or recognize the feminine features, and yet she is represented as the god Osiris, the god of the underworld. Remember, it's a funerary temple. She's wearing the double crown of the north and the south to show that she is ruling on a united Egypt. She is holding the scepter and the flail in her hands, the two signs and the insignias of royalty. Next, please. Thank you, Ophir. Then we start visiting the Valley of the Kings. It is believed that the pyramids were too obvious in front of the tomb robbers, because although they believed in the divinity of the pharaoh, it never stopped them to try to get all the treasures that were found inside. And let me tell you, the punishment for those tomb robbers was the mutilation of the ears and the nose and throwing them in the desert to rot and die all alone, but it never stopped them, as I told you. So they abandoned building pyramids and they started rock cutting their tombs in a beautiful mountain in the Valley of the Kings. And we have 63 tombs over there. This is one of the best visited ones, the tomb of Ramses V, and actually Ramses VI. There are two of them, pharaohs buried there. The scenes are beautiful. The paintings are so fresh. One of the visitors actually noted that you would imagine, you would think that the painters of the tomb had just left with their brushes before your arrival. The scenes will be decorated for the ceiling with astronomical scenes, and all the scenes on the walls that you see are funerary books, such as the Book of the Imiduat, what is found in the other world, Litanies of Ra, Book of the Caverns, all the books, the very mysterious books that scholars today of Egyptology say they can never really assert that they understand every thing that happens there. Although the scene will always be accompanied by that hieroglyphic text that explains to you what's going on. Next, please, Ophir. This is the entry to that tomb, and you can see it is sort of, it has got an access. Actually, when you go there, you will notice it. It's an east-west. In the west, or in the extreme west, in the burial chamber, the sarcophagus will lie with the body of the pharaoh. Next, please, Ophir. The tomb of Tutankhamun, the most important discovery, archaeological discovery ever made in the world. It was discovered in the year 1922 after long seasons of search. And when you go to the Valley of the Kings and see the position of that tomb, you will understand why it was found intact. It is sort of squinched underneath two tombs. No one would ever imagine that there was something buried in this sort of awkward position. The mummy still lies inside with two of the coffins that covered the mummy for protection. One of them is made out of wood covered with a gold leaf, and the second one is made out of quartzite stone. Only the burial chamber is decorated, and in the burial chamber you can see the pharaoh with different divinities and with his successor, the priest eye, performing the process or the ritual of the opening of the mouth in order to give another life to the pharaoh after his death. Next, please. Queens were buried, queens and princes, actually members of the royal, other members of the royal family were buried in the Valley of the Queens. This is the tomb of the Queen Nefertari, the wife of Ramses II, his beloved wife. This is why he granted her this tomb together with the temple in Abu Simbel that we're going to see. For every pharaoh, there was a royal wife. You can say an official wife. She will be accompanying him in certain religious festivity. Then there will be other minor wives. That is to say, wives from the royal family. We explained in last lecture that the shift or transition from one family to another takes place when the pharaoh dies, leaving no heir to the throne. The ancient Egyptian, like with the Jewish people, they believed that the royal blood ran in the veins of the ladies. It's the mother that founds a pharaoh. If a pharaoh has a son with a concubine, he cannot ascend the throne because his mother did not have the royal blood to transmit to him. So there will be a royal wife, there will be minor wives, and there will be lots of concubines. The pharaoh's fertility will be inflicted on the fields of Egypt. You can see the Queen Nefertiti in front of her. This is the cow goddess Hathor. She's holding the Ankh sign in her hand, and she's pinpointing it to the nose of the queen. You remember long time ago, there was this, in modern time, of course, there was this funny sort of songbook like an Egyptian. The representation of the human figure in relief or in painting will be always made as such. Have a look. The feet will be in profile position. The torso will be in a frontal view, the head in profile, and the eyes in a frontal view. This is not really realistic, but this is how we believe the ancient Egyptian artists thought best to represent every part of the human figure. Picasso of eternity. Let me see the next one, if you please, Ophir. In the Valley of the King, there is the tomb of Khaimwas, one of the sons of Ramses III. Ramses III is actually one of the rulers. We call him the great pharaoh, the last pharaoh, because he's the last great pharaoh we had actually in our history. Afterwards, there was the decline in the power of the pharaohs. So his son died at the age of 14. As usual, he will be mummified and buried in the Valley of the Queens. So you see, Ramses III is leading his son, and we know that he is his son by the lock of hair to the side, sign of infancy in ancient Egypt. He's taking him in order to present him to the divinities that are going to be awaiting him in the second life to come. Next one, if you please, Ophir. This is the temple of Komombo. When the Greeks invaded in the year 332, Alexandria became the capital. It was still very important to them to be taking care of those temples in order not to have the Egyptians revolting. And believe me, we used to revolt from one time to another. The politicians were the priests. If you take care of their temples and thus keep their power, a beautiful temple to get to visit is the temple of temple dedicated. It's the only case in which it is dedicated to two different temples, and it is one of the most beautiful relief. Although, unfortunately, let me tell you that the majority of this temple was taken during the time of modern Egypt, the second half of the 19th century, in order to build one of the sugar factories. And yet it still holds many important scenes for us to enjoy. Next one, please. The Temple of Edfu. The Temple of Edfu is dedicated to the god Horus. In front of us is the open court. The open court is the last you can go as a commoner. And when I refer to the term commoner here, I don't mean commoner per se, but I mean the elite of the society, the non-royal and the I mean, anyone other than the pharaoh and the priests, those who will be permitted inside the temple itself. So during certain festivity, this is as far as you could go. And you can see, as actually, if you you can discern, the entry of the temple is flanked on both sides by a representation of the falcon god, the god Horus. This is the most complete temple that we have in Egypt. The Greco-Roman temples, this is how we call them, but actually these are 100% Egyptian temples built under the Greco-Roman rule. These are some kind of, like, you can say, a dictionary of everything that concerns the ancient Egyptian religion. That is to say, in a temple such as the Temple of Karnak, every pharaoh will pick and choose what he wants to dedicate to the god Amun-Ra. But under the Greco-Roman rule, the priests felt like they were losing their culture, so they made sure to incorporate inside temples so they become a real encyclopedia. This is the most complete, as I told you, and it holds over 1,400 offering scenes inside. It will end with a sanctuary holding the statue of the god Horus. Next one, if you please, Ophir. The Temple of Philae. The Temple of Philae is called the Pearl of Egypt because it is one of the most beautiful temples you can visit. It was built on an island, and this island was totally inundated by the waters of the River Nile after the building of the high dam that was inaugurated in 1969. It was a great loss to the world, so thanks to Madame Noblecourt, the director of the Egyptian department at the Louvre Museum in Paris, she made an appeal to the whole world together with our Minister of Culture, and they started gathering all sorts of donations, and they managed finally, together with the Egyptian Department of Antiquities, to move that temple to a higher island so that you can enjoy it today. Just an example about how religion went side by side, went side to side with politics. You know, the reason why this temple was founded is that during the 26th dynasty, later in our history, we were having tribes in the south. So what did we do? We needed to have some kind of security point to stop them. So they decided to found a temple. And because the goddess Isis, the goddess of the Temple of Philae, was one of the most important goddesses, and the cult of Isis actually spread out in Europe and went all the way to England, pilgrims used to come from different places in order to visit. So once you found this temple, automatically there will be the clergy, there will be the army of the temple as well, because every temple had its army, and there will be a lot of influx of those pilgrims, and you will sure that that part, the southern part, southern frontiers will be secure. Next, please, Ophir. The temple of Isis was dedicated to the goddess Isis, and you can see her flanking both her wings in order to protect her husband Osiris. Let me remind you of the most important legend that is found in ancient Egypt. It says, the whole world started as a primordial ocean of chaotic water. In the midst, a mount appeared, and that mount is the one on top of which the god Atum-Ra created himself, and then he started creating all the different entities. He created 4 humans: Isis, Osiris, Set, and Nephthys. Osiris is the firstborn male. He marries Isis, the one you see at his back, his sister, and he rules over the people because he's the first created, like the firstborn. But Set, his evil brother, is jealous, so he kills him. And in one of the versions, because we have a couple of them, he cuts his body into 16 pieces, scattered them all around the River Nile, because without a body, you cannot be resurrected again. So we get over and done with him forever. But Isis, luckily, was a magician as well. or a sorcerer. So she went and gathered all those pieces and gave the body of her husband the breath of life. How did she do that? By causing wings, by causing air by means of her wings, and he was resurrected again. During one night, Horus, the falcon god, was conceived, and then Osiris decided to leave this earthly place and go to the second life and become the god of the underworld. But in the temple of the goddess Isis, he is resurrected, and there you go. And in order to create the whole legend of Osiris being there with Isis and the pilgrimage spot and everything, Osiris was always residing in Abydos, some 300 kilometers north of Luxor, so quite far away. But we needed himself. So what did they do? They formed that legend in which Abydos was becoming very crowded, and the god Osiris was not happy with the noise, so he decided to go to a secluded place, and he chose Phila in order to have his tomb. And Isis, of course, followed, and so did all the pilgrims. Next, please. In every temple, there was a sanctuary. That's what we see in front of us, the sanctuary of the goddess Isis. The pedestal that you see here is actually upon which the statue of the goddess Isis will be put. Every day, 3 times, the priest will go and make some kinds of offerings, say some prayers, but the most important rituals will be done in the morning when the statue will be taken care of, it will be ointed, it will be dressed, and so on. Next one, please. You remember our group photo?
Yes, yes, of course, of course. I was wondering who these beautiful people are. Absolutely.
Oh, yes. Hope to see you again soon, inshallah.
Inshallah, in October, yes.
Yes, that is the pylon, the entry pylon of the goddess Isis temple. And you can see to the left, everything, all the representation of Isis and the divinities were actually systematically sabotaged, chiseled out, because the cult of Isis was the strongest there was. Even when the whole Roman Empire turned into Christianity, the service was dedicated in the temple of Isis to the goddess Isis, and it was like a very difficult task to change the cult of Isis into the Christianity, and this is why the scenes were chiseled out, and a church was built inside the temple of Isis.
Wafika, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Oh, okay, okay.
I'm okay.
Yeah, I think your internet connection was disconnected for a second there. No. So we'll move on to the next one. Okay.
Okay. Can we go to the next one? Yes. The obelisk, yes. Unfinished obelisk.
Yes.
Those obelisks are actually testimony of the genius of engineering and architecture and logistics in ancient Egypt. Luckily, we had this unfinished obelisk. It was not good luck for the ancient Egyptians, because after doing all that hard work to carve the obelisk out of the quarries of granite in Aswan, they had a crack, so they abandoned it. If it would have been a success, this obelisk would have been the largest ever in our history. It is a point that you visit, and it's one of my favorite places actually. The obelisks again were an incarnation of the sun god, because they end with a small pyramidion, and they were covered with electrum, which is amalgam that was found in nature, amalgam of gold and silver. Every day when the sun rises, its rays will be reflected on this obelisk, and it will bestow its graces on the whole of Egypt. Next one, please. Abu Simbel. The temple of Abu Simbel was dedicated by Ramses II to 3 different divinities, and guess who? Ramses II himself. in the sanctuary. Ramses II is seated among three of the most important divinities that we have. And again, the thing is that we were having problems with the Nubians. So scholars say to scare them, because these are really huge statues of Ramses II, he built this temple of his. He is represented 4 times on the facade himself, and this was actually discovered during the 19th century for the first time. There was a Swiss man called Burckhardt who was sent by the English authorities in order to discover the sources of the Nile. While he was on his boat heading south, guess what? The whole temple was covered with sand, and he could see the statue of Ramses II gazing at him. So not only the Nubians who were scared, but Burckhardt himself was as well. Later, about a decade later, Belzoni, the Italian, was able to excavate for the temple of Abu Simbel for all of us to enjoy nowadays as one of the most visited or one of the most favorite visited sites in Egypt. Next one, please. This is the inside of the temple. It is rock cut. And again, this temple was subject to the inundation of the river Nile caused by the waters of the Lake Nasser. So they moved it. And again, it was a huge and a genius engineering project to cut and move that temple to a higher position. Inside, you can see the Pharaoh Ramses II represented as the god Osiris, the god of the underworld. And then at the very end, where those people are standing, this is the sanctuary that holds the 4 statues of 3 divinities and Ramses II himself. Next one, if you please, Ophir. Ramses II was a great warrior. In the 5th year of his reign, the Hittites, the enemies in southern Turkey, who had founded an empire and started a rivalry with the Egyptians, they conquered one of the satrapies of the Egyptian empire. Ramses II took his troops and went to reclaim Kadesh. This is a battle that was ferocious, really. In our own annals, our own historical texts, we conquered. In the Hittite text, they conquered. How is that? You can say that from a military view, we lost the war. Because we retrieved Kadesh again. Ramses II lost so many men during that battle, and they had to bring all of those bodies back to Egypt. There was no eternity outside Egypt. You had to bury them in Egypt in order to have a second life. And he had to give some kind of explanation to the people. This is why the Battle of Kadesh is represented in every single temple that was dedicated by Ramses II over and over again, saying, I was conqueror during that battle. So you can see him here in the Battle of Kadesh throwing an arrow to one of his enemies on his chariot. Next, please. He did not forget his wife Nefertari, his most beloved, and he dedicated the smaller temple to her, but yet he is represented on the facade of her temple more than she is. You can see him flanking. You can see the Mary herself. A temple, no.
Sounds like we have a little bit of an internet problem here on Wafika's side. Wafika, perhaps you could disable your camera, and that might make the things a little bit easier for the internet on your side.
Okay, I'll be a second. Someone has to do it for me. Just a second, excuse me.
Yeah, you could just end the video on your side. It might take off some of the bandwidth and make things easier.
Okay, we'll do right now.
Okay, okay.
Can you deactivate the camera because of the internet connection? If you deactivate my camera, maybe it will be a better transmission.
كلميني بالعربي بس. عايزة ايه؟
يعني في
you know who those 4 statues are of?
I think those are his wife, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, is this a better transmission in this room, Ophir? I deactivated the camera, so maybe
yes, it sounds like it's a little bit better of a transmission because it's taking less, broadband. So we can continue from here. Yes.
Perfect. So I wanted to answer to the latest question.
Yes, we were asking. Kathy was asking who this statue, these 4 statues are.
Yeah, these statues are in the first statues, 2 statues flanking both sides of the entry. This is Ramses II himself. Next to him are 2 statues of his wife, the Queen Nefertari. I mean, when you see the facade, there's more of them. There are actually 6 of Ramses II and 4 of Nefertari. So he still wins. Next, please, Ophir.
Okay.
And then we go to the Egyptian Museum. The Egyptian Museum is the largest museum of antiquities in the whole world. It was inaugurated in 1901, thanks to the great work of Mariette, the French Egyptologist. Egyptology became a discipline actually when Champollion deciphered the ancient Egyptian language, or took the many first steps in deciphering the ancient Egyptian language, steps that were continued by other Egyptologists. So you get to visit there and go in a chronological order to understand much more about the history of ancient Egypt. Here you have the Sphinx in front of us with the background, the Egyptian Museum itself. Can we see the next one, please? That's the inside of the Egyptian Museum with 2 beautiful colossal statues of Amenhotep III and his wife Tiye. Actually, the museum was built around them. Next one, if you please, Ophir. This is the stela of Merimpetah, or the stela of the Exodus, or the stela of Israel. It is the only piece in our history that holds the name Israel or Yisrael. This is the part that is darkened down there. You know why it is darkened? Because all the Israeli and the Jewish tourists would come and look for that stela, and they wanted to know where the name Israel is written. And there it is. As usual, the Pharaoh would brood upon all his conquests. So you see him up in the lunette. There is the god Amun with his 2 feathers, and then the Pharaoh himself is in front of him. The god Amun is giving him the dagger of victory, and then at the back of the Pharaoh there are 2 divinities. The text himself, the Pharaoh broods upon all the conquests against all the enemies, and finally he says that he expelled the Israelis out of the country. We don't know actually whether these were the Israelis with Moses in the Exodus, or maybe some kind of Israelis coming to Sinai, and he went after them just like he would go after the Bedouins of Sinai here, or the Bedouins of the Western Desert there. Next one, if you please, Ophir.
If I'm not mistaken, Wafika, this stele is the oldest testimony we have to the word Israel being printed somewhere. The oldest archaeological written word of Israel. It's the first time. And, the Egyptian Empire went all the way into northern Israel today, back in those days. So so it could very well be that he's talking about, all the way up there, all the way up in Israel. Yeah.
True, Ophir. Very true. And the reason why no record of the Exodus was actually, and the partition of the Red Sea and all of that was recorded on any of our monuments or in any of the texts, is because the Egyptians would not want to be like conquered by the people of Moses. I mean, the Israeli people leaving Egypt against the orders of the Pharaoh. Next one, if you please. If you ever went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you're going to see many of those examples. That's the collection of Meketra. It is the weavers. Weaving was usually done by ladies. They are making the linen. And when this will be put inside the tomb of Meketra of the 12th dynasty, around 1800 BC, this will mean that he will always have clothing in the afterlife. So if you ever go, please look to the Metropolitan Museum, please look for the collection of Meketra. You have many more nice pieces as that, because it was a joint expedition between our Department of Antiquities and the Metropolitan Museum of Art during a certain stage of our modern history when we used to split the finds with the foreign expedition. Next one, please, Ophir. The Mask of Tutankhamun, a masterpiece of art. 11 kilos of solid gold. It is really ironic that Tutankhamun was a pharaoh with no significance whatsoever in our history, and the riches that were left in his tomb are endless. Over 5,000 pieces. This is one of the most beautiful ones of them that you get to see when you visit the Egyptian Museum. Next one, please, Ophir. You get to visit the Ben Ezra synagogue, a 10th century synagogue that was built by Ben Ezra. Actually, Ben Ezra, the rabbi of Jerusalem, was visiting, and he purchased that. It was a church back then. He purchased it because, according to tradition, he said that it is in this very spot that Moses spoke to God, and in this very spot he left out of Egypt with his people. And you remember, Ophir, when we went, you made the translation of those two marble panels, and you said that this is exactly what the Hebrew text says.
Yes, that is correct.
Yes. Next one, if you please. And again, you can see the sanctuary here is decorated on both sides, those panels with the 10 commandments. And it is the same artwork that you're going to see, the wooden artwork with the marquetry inlayment. You will see it in the church, in the synagogue, in the mosque, because it was the same artist working everywhere. And then you can see the rolls of the Old Testament on top of the Torah stand, in the Torah Ark. You get also to visit the church, the hanging church. We call it the hanging church because actually it was built on one of the bastions that were left to us from the ancient Roman fortress of Babylon, built by Trajan in the year 98 AD. It used to be the seat of the Patriarch of Egypt until recently, for centuries. And actually the Egyptians are the founders of the Orthodox cult in Christianity. And you can say that they are the real descendants of the ancient Egyptian population. They are the ones who, when conquered by the Arabs, did not leave the religion and they stuck to it. So they still have in their language, actually in the written language, Coptic language or Christian language, held in the memory of their own priests, the last evolution of the ancient Egyptian language. Next one, if you please. Well, this is the St. Sergis Church. In that very crypt that you see to the right, the Virgin Mary, together with Jesus Christ and Joseph, stayed for about 2 months when they fled from Jerusalem, coming to Egypt, a trip that took 3 years. This is why it's a place of pilgrimage. And to the left-hand side, you can see the very well from which they drank. Next one, if you please. Cairo is the city that holds more Islamic monuments than any other city in the world. And when we evoke the Egyptian art, Islamic art, it is the Mamluk art. The Mamluks, actually Mamluk literally means owned. These are Turkish slaves that in a certain turn of history took power. They ruled over Egypt from 1250 until 1516, the conquest of the Ottomans. This is one of the most beautiful buildings, the mosque and madrasa of the Sultan Hassan. And actually, madrasa means like a law college. This is what it is. It is to found the judges of tomorrow. Next one, if you please. Muhammad Ali came to Egypt, as I told you, as part of the troops that were meant to expel the Napoleon expedition out of the country together with the British. he was a very genius man, actually, and very ambitious as well. Let me tell you, he was illiterate until the age of 40 and didn't speak one word of Arabic when he came. He was Albanian of origin, but he managed to become the sole ruler of Egypt. He ruled from 1805 until 1848. And the last of the family of Muhammad Ali is actually King Farouk, the one who was expelled out of Egypt in the bloodless coup of Nasser. This mosque is built in the Byzantine style, a copy of the Sultan Ahmed Mosque in Istanbul, and it is grand and magnificent on the outside and the inside as well. When we visit that mosque, everybody is struck with its beauty and grandeur. And as the historians tell us in the history book, nothing is too much for he who rivals the Sultan, because this is exactly what Muhammad Ali did. He rivaled the Sultan of Turkey. Next one, if you please. Alexandria, a beautiful city on the Mediterranean, the second largest in population in Egypt. It was founded by Alexander the Great, or rather by the successor of Alexander the Great, Ptolemy. But it is Alexander the Great who chose the spot itself. It's really a beautiful place to visit, a beautiful city, and we got a lot of beautiful monuments to show you there. It is just that once you get there, you start to use a lot of Greco-Roman terms such as triclinium, rotunda, Agamemnon, and Medusa. Next one, if you please. This is the Hippodrome. It is actually like a small theater. It is found in what used to be the city center of Alexandria. You get to see many other important parts of the downtown when you visit that site. Unfortunately, the problem with Alexandria, it used to be one of the greatest cities in the world. It is found on the edge, or the place where the delta or the river Nile meets the Mediterranean. So the accumulation of the silt is multiplied over there, and all the monuments, most of the monuments are covered with mud. They say 12 meters of mud. I mean, it's very difficult to excavate for, but we still have a lot of beautiful Greco-Roman monuments to show you, because Alexandria used to be one of the greatest cities in the whole world during that time. Next one, please, Ophir. In the catacombs of Qom el-Shu'afa, you see a beautiful melange of two great civilizations. 3-story underground of burial. Some of them are Egyptian burial in sarcophagi, and some of them are locally in which there are the urns with the ashes burnt of the Greeks and Romans over there. We see in front of us something very sweet, actually, or we see the god Anubis, the god of the underworld, very stern and very serious in the ancient Egyptian representation, but you see him here with a very rounded figure with some kind of shawl and tunic. The dress itself is absolutely Greco-Roman. So this is the modification of the version, or the Greco-Roman version of the god Anubis, the god of mummification and necropolis. Next one, please, Ophir. The fortress of Qaitbay. And again, Qaitbay was one of the Mamluks of Egypt. He expected some problems from the Ottomans, and he was right to do so. So he decided to build this fortress, and he built it on the ruins of the second ancient wonder of the world, because we had two of them. One was the pyramids of Giza, and the second one was the Paris Lighthouse that unfortunately was broken several times, so it doesn't exist anymore. But on that very special site, he built this fortress using the very same stones that one day built the Paris Lighthouse. Eventually, a few decades afterwards, we were conquered by the Ottomans. The Mamluks were ferocious and very courageous military men, but the weaponry of the Ottomans brought from Europe was much more advanced than ours, and we finally ceded to them. Next one, please. The Mount of Sinai. You get to visit St. Catherine's Monastery, and you get to make that trip. You start at 1 a.m. in the morning, It takes you a few hours, and finally you get to the top of the Mount Sinai and you wait for the sunrise. If you can't do it on foot, then the Bedouins are going to provide you with camels. It's an adventure of a lifetime and a very special and touching experience, according to tourists. And afterwards, the next one, please, Ophir. After doing all that sightseeing tour, you are entitled to some days in Sharm el-Sheikh to enjoy the beautiful weather, the beautiful warm waters, and definitely lots of snorkeling and scuba diving. Waiting for you, inshallah, Ophir. You bring all those beautiful people to visit us, hopefully soon. And please, if you have any questions to ask, I'm ready to answer them.
Okay, well, first of all, Wafika, thank you very much for taking the time in your important holiday and the feast of ending the Ramadan, Eid al-Fitr. Thank you for taking the time to do this, to complete our understanding of Egypt and to get all excited about traveling to the country. And just like with any country that we've been talking about in these lectures, you really need to see it with your own eyes.
Very true.
To understand the magnitude and the beauty and the things that are so special, and also to, of course, to experience the sites themselves, the culture and everything. And so I'd like to thank you for that. And the second thing is I wanted to apologize for the problems we had with the PowerPoint here. It kept trying to jump forward and I wasn't able to control it very well. So I did my best.
You're very much under control.
Yeah. So does anybody have any questions to Wafika? You're welcome to unmute yourself or chat the questions at this point.
I have a question.
Please, go ahead.
Hi, Kathy. Shalom. Kathy, did I see correctly that you went through some course for Egypt or something?
Well, after I heard Wafika's talk, I don't know, it's been a month now, I suppose.
Yeah.
I took an online course of about 50 lectures on ancient Egypt.
That's great.
Because, you know, it goes back and forth, and I just like to have it in chronological order in my head. You know, when Ramses the Great was versus when, you know, whoever was. But my question is that new museum that was supposed to open near Cairo, has it opened yet?
I'm afraid, unfortunately not. You know, we had it planned for 10/10/2020, 10th of October 2020. Very romantic, but unfortunately, with that coronavirus coming, all the work stopped, so we can't meet the foreseen date that we have already given everybody. We were waiting for lots of tourists to come, but I hope that it will be inaugurated soon when we are over and done with that pandemic problem, and I hope to see you then. And I would definitely love to give you, if we still have time, do we still have time, Ophir, to give the lady like a resume of all the dynasties and stuff? Or or should I write an email to you and you will transmit it to the lady?
Well, I learned all that. I learned all that in my course.
So what was your question, Kathy? Could you repeat the question one more time, please? You're looking for the timeline.
No. Of the opening of the new museum.
Oh, the opening of the new museum, right? Okay.
Oh yes.
Yeah. No, I don't have a question because I have my little cheat sheet here from my course that I took, and I make notes all over it.
Well, that museum, I think the entire world is waiting to hear when that museum is open. Everybody is waiting for it big time. And
yes.
I hope it'll be open before we get there in October. You know, we'll see what happens. They've been trying to open it for years now.
True, that's very true.
Yeah.
The amount of work that's done there is really magnificent, and it will be something out of this world, really. Waiting for you to come and see it, inshallah, very soon.
Absolutely. I hope it'll be soon. So to anybody interested at this point, like I said, you know, we have a tour going to Egypt. Nobody knows yet. You know, I haven't determined yet if it will be going or not. We're waiting kind of in a wait position for the next few weeks. to see what's going on with the coronavirus around the world and in the US. You can see things opening up a little bit in all kinds of countries, including areas of the US, and airlines are starting to talk about the possibility of flying and how they're going to make flying safe. And I'm also thinking about how to make my tours safe for this year and for next year, maybe by doing something with the single supplement, you know, reducing it or eliminating it so that people who are not from the same family unit, you know, don't have to share a room or something like that. We'll see about all kinds of possibilities. We'll see where that goes. Safety is, of course, beyond and above and beyond any other measure. If anybody is interested in learning more about the tour that we currently have going, we've got about 11 or 12 people, you know, as I said, we're waiting to see how things develop. That tour can be seen on my website, scopiatours.com/Egypt 2020. And you're welcome there. You'll see the entire tour brochure and the as well as the what's included, the itinerary, a registration form, and information about the possible group insurance. So once again, thank you all very, very much for joining. If nobody has any further questions for Wafika or for myself, I'll try to figure out something for next week. We'll see if there's something interesting going on. As the weather gets better, we might have fewer people interested, so maybe we'll switch to once every 2 weeks. We'll see. But in any event, I'll be in touch with everybody by email. So thank you again very much for joining us. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you with us, Wafika, Jamal from Cairo. And
thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. Kul aam antum bikhair, and only the very best to you. And thank you everybody for joining us. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, salam.
Salam alaikum. Bye-bye.
Salam alaikum.